Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 239. And if you guys are looking for past episodes that I've done, the best archive of even going back to the audio podcast before I started doing video, go to my Substack. My Substack's the only thing that doesn't have the name According to Sam. It's under my full name, my real name, Samuel Winchester. So if you go to Substack and you look for Samuel Winchester Substack, you will find pieces that I've written there on my Substack. I need to start writing more. You'll also find the archive of this podcast going back to the very first podcast that I've done. Anyway, yeah. So you can also find the podcast on YouTube, on Rumble. I'm putting it on Facebook, on Twitter, and then on Substack as well. So that's where you can find the archive of past podcasts. Welcome to According to Sam, episode 239 again. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Kamala Harris's economic proposals that she put out last week. The Democratic National Convention is just starting today. I have a feed going on right here. I'm watching the protests. There's not very many protesters right now, and it looks like the Chicago Police Department is pretty well prepared for anything that happens. I mean, they have a huge force, is what it looks like. It looks like they have so far from what I've seen, I've been watching this for about an hour now. It looks like they have a pretty good strategy. So it's still daytime. It's still daytime as I'm watching this. So who knows what's going to happen when night falls. There's tons of journalists there. Not a huge presence of protesters, but the protesters that are there, they have gas masks. They have, other things that lead me to believe that they're prepared for some mayhem. So we'll see what happens when the sun goes down. So again, we're going to get into Kamala Harris's economic proposals that she made last week. And this is the beginning of their convention. I think they've already put out a platform. I haven't gone through it. We'll probably get more into this on Friday because I'm not going to even scratch the surface today and what I want to do in laying out the economic proposals that she has proposed. That these things. I mean, anyway, let's just get right into this. These are the economic proposals that Kamala Harris made in her speech last week. And these are her first original policy positions. She put out a policy position last week to not tax tips of service employees, but that wasn't original. And some of the proposals that she presented last week in her economic proposals, at least one of them wasn't original. We'll get more into that, not in this podcast, but that's the child tax credit, expanding the child tax credit. But let's take a look at this clip, and it lays out these policy positions.
In the swing state of North Carolina today, Vice President Harris is unveiling a bold economic agenda. The campaign saying her plan will include $25,000 in down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers, a call to build 3 million new housing units, and a first-of-its-kind ban on corporate price gouging on.
a ban on corporate price gouging essentially means price fixing. That a ban on corporate price gouging means potentially that there could be a price cap on things like food, is what she's proposing. Listen to
for
the rest
first-time home buyers, a call to build 3 million new housing units, and a first-of-its-kind ban on corporate price gouging on groceries.
So the corporate price gouging on groceries, we'll get into and talk more about that in a moment. The $25,000 down payment assistance for housing, we'll talk more about that here in a moment as well. More inventory, building 3 million. This all sounds great. But what I want to do is I want to lay the foundation of why prices are so high right now on groceries and food. Why is it so hard to buy real estate right now? And prices are high, but not only prices, interest rates. Why even is there a inventory shortage? I mean, what's the reason behind that? So to tell that story, I want to start at a very rudimentary level and explain some basic things about economics. And this is a clip from a BBC series that they did called The Ascent of Money. It was a 4-part series on BBC. Terrific. I mean, I suggest everybody go and watch this 4-part series done by Niall Ferguson of BBC called The Ascent of Money. And people need to watch this now more than ever because, I mean, economically, we're living in a very illiterate country when it comes to economics. So let's just discuss some basic things about economics that Niall Ferguson explores in this documentary. Let's take a listen.
Francisco Pizarro and his fellow conquistadores had come from Spain to what they called Upper Peru, inspired by the legend of El Dorado, the realm of the gold-covered king. After defeating the Inca army at the Battle of Cajamarca, their quest began in earnest. At Potosi, in what is now Bolivia, the Spaniards struck it rich. They discovered the Cerro Rico, literally, the rich hill. Towering nearly 16,000 feet above sea level, it was a money mountain.
So the Spaniards came to the New World and they found this mountain that had all of this silver ore in it. And they had discovered all of this money in the New World. The conquistadors, when they came over to the New World, sponsored by the Habsburgs, and they started to take all of this silver out of this mountain, mine it, and then send this silver back to Europe. Now, take a listen to this part of the clip.
The silver ore was ground up, refined with mercury, and then shipped to Europe as bars and coins. Empire, it seemed, had made the Spanish crown rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And yet all the silver in the mines of Potosi couldn't halt the inexorable economic and political decline of Spain's empire.
All of this money could not halt the economic decline of the Spanish Empire. Why did all of this money not help to grow the Spanish Empire and make the Spanish Empire rich after they discovered all of this silver in the New World and shipped it back to Europe? Why did this have the adverse effect that what you would logically think that all of this money would immediately make the Spanish Empire prosperous. But it didn't make the Spanish Empire prosperous. It made the Spanish Empire decline rapidly. Why did all of this money make the Spanish Empire decline so rapidly?
And yet all the silver in the mines of Potosi couldn't halt the inexorable economic and political decline of Spain's empire. Why was that, when Pizarro seemed to have struck it so incredibly rich? The answer is that the Spaniards had dug up so much silver to finance their wars of conquest that the metal itself suffered an extraordinary decline in value. More silver coins didn't make Spain richer. They simply made prices higher as an increased quantity of money chased the same amount of goods.
This is a basic economic principle, people. This is a basic economic principle. Because their measure of the resource that they use as money was precious metal, gold and silver. And when you introduce more gold and silver into their economy, it doesn't matter what they use for money. They could use dollars. I mean, if you watch this documentary, they talk about tally sticks. They talk about all of these different things that have been used as money throughout human history. It hadn't always been Federal Reserve notes. Sometimes it's precious metals. Sometimes it's tally sticks. He even goes back to Mesopotamia and he shows the little clay tablets that they would use with the cuneiform carved into them that they would actually use as money. It doesn't matter what they're using for money, whether it's dollars, whether it's gold, whether it's silver. Once you introduce more of that into the economy, then prices are going to rise. And that is what inflation is. It is the inflation of the currency. That's what it is. And that's what happened to Spain when they found all of this silver in the New World. It inflated their currency. It's what happened in Weimar. It's what happened in Venezuela. And you know, people like to distinguish between hyperinflation and inflation. I mean, hyperinflation doesn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, it starts as inflation and it goes into hyperinflation. This is one more clip from this series, The Ascent of Money.
On the back of the $10 bill, it says, "In God we trust." But it's not really God you're trusting in. By swapping your goods or your labor for a fistful of these things, you're trusting the US Treasury Secretary not to repeat Spain's mistake and produce so many of the damn things that by the time you come to spend them, they're worth even less than the paper they're printed on.
So you create more of these, and the more of these dollars that you create, then they're chasing the same amount of goods and the same amount of labor. The labor's the same. The labor's the same. And the goods are the same. But when you start creating more of your currency, no matter what it is, dollars, gold, silver, then once you have more of that currency out chasing the same goods and the same labors, that's going to raise the cost of those goods and labor. That is what inflation is. And that's what happened. That's what happened in this country during COVID and Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's first year. That's what happened, that they created a lot of these dollars. Not only them, also during the Trump administration, but you're going to see during the Trump administration, it was them. It was them during the Trump administration as well, because Nancy Pelosi controlled the House of Representatives in Trump's last 2 years. And I'm going to show you here in a moment what happened in the Senate when Republicans tried to clamp down on the COVID spending at the end of 2020 and in the beginning of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's first year in 2021. They created a lot of these. And so to understand Kamala Harris's economic policies that she's coming up with now to fix a problem that she helped cause, as you're going to see, The reason that grocery prices are where they are and you're paying so much for groceries and fuel is not because of greedy corporations, is what they're telling you. No, it's because they created all of these. They created so much of these that are chasing the same energy, the same fuel, the same food. The food's the same. The fuel's the same. Problem is that the prices on these real goods has increased because you have more dollars chasing those same goods and labor. So you have to understand that first to understand as we break down her economic proposals that she's making. Now, I want you to listen to Hakeem Jeffries, and Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader in the House of Representatives, New York congressman. And just yesterday, he was interviewed by Jake Tapper, and I want you to take a listen. He's asked about these new economic proposals that Kamala Harris just came out with.
Well, the Washington Post editorial board said blaming big business or corporations was a, quote, gambit. The San Francisco Federal Reserve found little evidence that price gouging was the main culprit behind inflation, floating supply chains and production costs instead. Isn't part of the problem here when it comes to high prices and inflation the fact that you and your colleagues on Capitol Hill, along with both President Trump and President Biden, infused the economy with perhaps too much cash because of the pandemic?
So understand the question that Jake Tapper is asking him. It's going right back to the ascent of money and what Niall Ferguson says in this documentary, that too much currency in the system made prices go up in Spain. Too much silver in Spain made the prices go up in Spain, and it was and eventually caused the downfall in the Spanish economy. That's what he says. Jake Tapper's asking Hakeem Jeffries, isn't the reason for inflation because you guys, even going back to the Trump administration, but it was still you guys, as you're getting ready to see, isn't the inflation because you guys printed too much currency, that you infused the system with too much currency? I want you to take a listen to what Hakeem Jeffries says here.
And production costs instead. Isn't part of the problem here when it comes to high prices and inflation the fact that you and your colleagues on Capitol Hill, along with both President Trump and President Biden, infused the economy with perhaps too much cash because of the pandemic?
The challenge is that President Biden and Vice President Harris inherited 3 different catastrophes from the prior president at the same time. There was a public health catastrophe connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was an economic catastrophe that resulted from the shutdown of our economy. And of course, there was a democracy catastrophe related to the January 6th violent assault on the Capitol incited by the former president as part of the effort to halt the peaceful transfer of power. And so
so he says January 6th, the transfer of power is January 20th, buddy. January 6th doesn't have anything to do with January 20th, but he's an absolute liar, and you can see that he's already trying to divert responsibility and say no, that the inflation didn't have anything to do with all the money that we created and all the spending that we did. That we inherited this crisis. We inherited COVID-19, which by the time you guys came in, there was already a vaccine. COVID was already at its tail end. What was the other crises that he said? Economic crisis because of the shutdown. People were going back to work. That's another reason we didn't need all this stimulus and all this cash in the economy, which Republicans told you, which even Democrats, as you're getting ready to see, told you we didn't need all that money. So he's lying. He's lying on many different fronts here, and I've just broken them all down for you. But it does not want to accept any responsibility for the spending that they did and the creation of new currency in the system that created inflation. He doesn't want to accept that responsibility.
Context of the economic catastrophe, the shutdown of the economy had consequences. And when demand came back, the supply chain needed to, of course, catch up. And so that
so
is
it's always the supply chain. Everyone's using this excuses of the supply chain. Did you have any problems getting any supplies other than toilet paper during COVID-19? Was there any when you went to the grocery store to go get food? Was there any bare shelves? I mean, I guess I saw some pictures of bare shelves in some places. Definitely toilet paper because people were hoarding toilet paper. But I mean, I didn't really experience any supply chain shortages. But that's an excuse that Janet Yellen started, and at the same time, she was saying in the beginning, as we're getting ready to get into all of this, but in the beginning when inflation started to climb, she says that it's transitory. It's only going to last a few months, and then it was going to go down. These are all the things that they told us. They were all lies. So him making up these excuses is just showing that he doesn't want to accept the responsibility for what they did. But they are responsible, even for all of the spending in the Trump administration, at the end of the Trump administration, as I'm going to show you. Hakeem Jeffries, because he was a member of the House of Representatives and helped vote for all this spending, he's responsible. But again, Kamala Harris, as you're going to see, I've already explained to you, she's responsible because they did it with no Republicans, and she was the 51st vote. They did all this spending, or at least when Joe Biden got into office. But let's talk about before Joe Biden got into office. Let's talk about what happened towards the end of 2020 and the giant bill that they forced through. Again, Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the House of Representatives. Republicans had a slim majority in the Senate, but they couldn't come to a deal. They had already done a huge stimulus at the beginning of COVID, where they had decided to send everybody $400 who wasn't going to work, send them $400 a week on top of the unemployment that they were getting, pay everybody to stay home, shut down. They had already done trillions of dollars of spending. But towards going into the summer and then going into the fall, they were still negotiating a second huge stimulus, COVID stimulus, and Democrats and Republicans were at odds about the size of this thing, okay? And that's what it was about. It wasn't that Republicans didn't want to do anything. They were just complaining that we don't need to do that much. We don't need to infuse the economy with that much cash. That was what the debate was about. And before I play this next clip, the thing you got to understand is that the fiscal year for the government is October 1st. So the last day of the government's fiscal year is September 30th, and then October 1st is the first day of the government's fiscal year. So they were trying to get not only a budget deal done, but another COVID stimulus done before the deadline of October 1st. So, I mean, that was the objective, is that there was some debate in the beginning where people were saying, no, we want to keep them separate. You know, let's do the budget deal by itself and a COVID stimulus by itself, separate. And then there were those that were calling for them to be put together. But this was the debate that was going on towards the end of 2020. Okay, let's take a look at this clip.
The Senate is back in session, and as we move closer to Election Day, Congress and the White House have failed to reach a deal on a coronavirus relief package more than a month after the last one expired. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will force a vote sometime this week on a GOP-led proposal. The Senate left town on recess weeks ago with no deal. Their version of the bill is expected to be around $500 billion. That's
$500 billion. So Republicans were saying that we want to do a stimulus package, that we're expecting that and you can look at the date here. This is September 8th. The election is in November, so you're already September 8th when Republicans are proposing this, what they were calling a skinny, you can see the word right here, skinny COVID relief package is what McConnell was calling it, that we don't want to do a $2 trillion deal and infuse $2 trillion more into the economy. We'll do a scaled down version that's about 25% of that, a skinny COVID relief package. This is what Republicans were saying. This is why I say that and this is during the Trump administration. So this is what I'm saying is that even during the Trump administration, when you're blaming all of this spending on Trump towards the end of his administration, it wasn't all Trump. This is Democrats pushing, saying that no, $500 billion is not enough. We want $2 trillion is what they're basically saying here. So they're at odds with Republicans, not about doing the spending and another stimulus, but how much of a stimulus are we going to do?
A GOP-led proposal. The Senate left town on recess weeks ago with no deal. Their version of the bill is expected to be around $500 billion. That is far less than what Democrats are hoping for. Top Democrats are already calling that initiative dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival. Dead on arrival is what Pelosi said. That's what Schumer said too. Said no, $500 billion. No, that's not enough. Again, by September, now they announced that we had the vaccine and that we had a vaccine after the election. I think it was like the week after the election that the election's over, and then they announced we have a vaccine. But people were already talking about us in September that a vaccine is on its way, that there could be a vaccine before the election. All the Democrats, wish I had that clip prep, like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and all of them were saying, if we get a vaccine before the election, I wouldn't take it. They were all saying that. If we get a vaccine before Kamala Harris, man, I got to get that clip for you guys in the next podcast of her saying, if we get a vaccine before the election, I wouldn't take it. Basically telling the public, don't trust the vaccine if it comes out before the election. Then they announce it after the election, and then they're on this, hype about how everybody has to take it. So we are September 8th. Republicans are so September 8th. So we really only have 3 weeks at this point before the October 1st deadline. We need to get this deal done. Republicans are saying that they want to do $500 billion, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are saying, no, that's dead on arrival. $500 billion is not nearly enough. We need Mo. We want Mo. Take a listen.
At home, right? And we've been hearing about another stimulus bill for a long time, but lawmakers on both sides of the aisle can't seem to get on the same page as to what exactly should be in that stimulus bill. So later today, we know that the Senate is expected to vote on a procedural motion for what's being called the skinny bill. The Republican-led measure is about $500 billion. It includes $300 a week in enhanced jobless benefits, extends paycheck protection, and gives just over $100 billion in education funds. But what it doesn't include, stimulus checks, like another round of stimulus checks.
Stimmies. We need those stimmies.
So Democrats, they say that's not enough. They've put out a $2.2 trillion stimulus plan.
2.2. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer says no. We don't want $500 billion. We want $2.2 trillion. Yes, this is the Trump administration. Yes, Trump eventually ends up signing this, and when he signs it, what is it? Here it is right here. This is what it is when he ends up signing it, $2.3 trillion. even added another $100 billion or what is it? Yes, that would be $100 billion, I guess. Even add another $100 billion to what they wanted. Their wish list was 2.2 is what he says. And Trump ends up signing 2.3. And yes, this is included in Trump's debt. And yes, he gets credit for this debt, but Trump didn't want to sign this. Look at the date on this when Trump finally signs it, 12/21. This is 4 days before Christmas when he signs this. After they send it to him during Christmas time, this is what they always do. And then they play your heartstrings. Oh, this we're here during Christmas time, and little Timmy doesn't have his Stimmy check. Little Timmy doesn't have his Stimmy check during Christmas time. So they end up sending Trump this COVID relief with the omnibus. spending package at the same time during Christmas time and force him to sign it. He didn't want to sign it, but he gets credit for it. But these are the guys that played hardball. These are the guys that played hardball for $2 trillion. $2.2 trillion ends up being $2.3 trillion. They're the ones who demanding it. Republicans fought them all the way to the end and says, no, this is too much. We don't want to put that much cash into the system. I want you to listen to this clip.
Congress unveiled a $2.3 trillion spending package it is expected to approve in a matter of hours that provides relief to a coronavirus-battered economy while funding the government through the end of the fiscal year. The package includes a $1.4 trillion omnibus spending bill based on a 2019 deal.
$1.4 trillion was the omnibus spending budget package. This was the second omnibus that Trump was sent during his presidency, and then another $900 billion for Stimmy checks.
Deal and included $740.5 billion in defense spending and $664.5 billion in domestic spending. It also includes a $900 billion COVID relief bill.
All right, so now let's put this into context, because this is at the end of the year when Trump signs this package. It's, you can see here, I don't know if you can see the date, but it says 12/21. This is just 4 days before Christmas is when Trump signs this. So this is the end of the year, and then you get into January. Then you had the January 6th stuff happen, maybe just 2 weeks after this, and then a month from this date when Trump signs this, then Joe Biden is sworn in. Joe Biden is sworn in on 1/20, so you're basically 30 days away from when Trump signs this, then Joe Biden comes in. First thing Joe Biden does is start working on another Stimmy. Another Stimmy. They had just done 2.3 in December. Let me just tell you how we end up in December, because, again, they were not able to come to an agreement before the October 1st deadline. So then they pass a continuing resolution. So that's how you end up in December, because they were deadlocked. Republicans wanted $500 billion. They wanted $2 trillion, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So they ended up passing a continuing resolution. The continuing resolution pushed it off into December. And then they came with the little Timmy story. Little Timmy needs his Stimmy check. And then, so that's why, they forced Trump to pass it during Christmas time. So they send him the omnibus with the coronavirus, relief in there. And that's how they force him to sign it. The first time when Paul Ryan sent him an omnibus, they used the military as leverage. Both times they send him this omnibus, and it's like, if you don't sign this, then the military's not going to get paid. So he has to sign it. So then they did this at the end of his term in December, send him this with the omnibus, with all this wish list stuff that Nancy Pelosi just threw into the bill. And they force him that if during Christmas time, if you don't sign this, then little Timmy's not going to get his Stimmy. So they forced him to sign it. So then Biden comes in a month later, and Biden immediately starts working on another package. As a matter of fact, they start working on this package even before Biden came in. They had been working on another $2 trillion. Biden ends up signing the American Rescue COVID relief. March 11th is the date on this. So you're talking within a period of December, January, February, March, within a period of 4 months, you're talking about $4.2 trillion being signed out of the public treasury and infused into the economy. $4.2 trillion infused into the economy in a matter of 4 months. That's $1 trillion, an average $1 trillion per month. That within 4 months, $4 trillion were signed away out of the public treasury. This time, when Biden did this, not a single Republican voted for it. Not a single Republican was responsible for this. Not a single Republican in the House of Representatives voted for this. Not a single Republican in the Senate. The Republicans, just like they were in October, coming with a compromise deal saying, look, we'll do, $500 billion more. They'd already done 2.3 trillion. And all right, we'll do 500 billion more. We're not going to do 2 trillion more. Nancy Pelosi, at this time, Republicans had both the House and the Senate, because this is when Joe Biden is sworn in. They have both the House and the Senate. They don't have a 50-50 in the Senate, but with Kamala Harris's vote, with Vice President Kamala Harris's vote, then they can push it across. So they played hardball with Republicans. They're like, they can accept your offer for $500 billion. We're going with 2 trillion more. 2 trillion more. Let it ride. So they pushed it through the House of Representatives with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. They went to the Senate and they passed it with only Democrat votes and Kamala Harris voting for it. Now, and now even Mark Warner, who voted for it. Mark Warner is a Democrat. Even he says it was too much. That it was too much. Not the fact that they did it, that they did too much. And the whole time that they're doing too much. Same thing with the stimulus that they did before the end of the year and the stimulus that they did when Joe Biden comes in 2021. It wasn't that Republicans didn't want to work with them. It's that Republicans are saying, no, that's too much. We'll do $500 billion. No, Nancy Pelosi, no. Chuck Schumer, no. We want 2 trillion, 2 trillion. Now, even Mark Warner, Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief package was too big, Senator Warner. Larry Summers blasted it at the time when they were even debating it. Larry Summers, who's a Democrat, if you don't know who Larry Summers is, this guy's more responsible than anybody. I can't stand Larry Summers, but even Larry Summers was blasting. It says right here, headline, Larry Summers blasts $1.9 trillion stimulus as least responsible economic policy in 40 years. That's coming from Larry Summers talking about this stimulus that they did for $2 trillion, another $2 trillion in addition, when they had just done $2.3 trillion 4 months earlier, that this $2 trillion at this time when everything's opening back up, we have a vaccine, COVID's pretty much over. Why are we doing another $2 trillion? Worst, least responsible economic policy in 40 years. And for someone like you don't know who Larry Summers is, for someone like Larry Summers to say this, boy, let's take a listen to Larry Summers and what he was saying back then.
Let's start with the stimulus. We're on the cusp of getting more stimulus. Looks like the House is certainly going to approve it. Then we're going to have the Senate, $1.9 trillion. Whether you like it or not, certainly business leaders like it. We got a letter out this week from a lot of business leaders saying this is a great idea. The polls indicate the masses like it. If business leaders and masses like it, can they be wrong?
Business leaders have been wrong a lot in history. And they're right that stimulus is a good idea. Many of the business leaders who signed that letter have also been saying that the level of the stimulus is risky. And so we need stimulus, but not all of this.
Listen to what Summers is saying. He's saying the same thing that Republicans are saying, that no, this is not a question of should we do stimulus or shouldn't we do stimulus. This is a question of how much. How much should we do? Should we do 2 trillion? Or should we do the scaled down version of the 500 billion that the Republicans are proposing? This is what Larry Summers, Democrat, Larry Summers says, that that's not the question. about should we do stimulus. Yes, the business leaders are saying that they want a little bit more stimulus, and Main Street saying that they want a little bit. Of course, Main Street, they always want some more stimmies. You know, you think about it, people. When you think about how much you paid for this inflation that this caused, and you got a little $1,200 stimulus. I mean, you spent $1,200 more in inflation in the first couple of months of inflation than the $1,200 stimulus that he sent you, a one-time $1,200 stimulus. And then you paid 3 years of inflation that I guarantee you exceeded the $1,200 that you got in your little Stimmy check. But yes, of course, the public wants some more stimulus, and the business leaders want some more stimulus. It's not a question about if we're going to stimulate the economy more. It's about how much, is what Larry Summers, Democrat Larry Summers, says.
Leaders in masses like it, can they be wrong?
Business leaders have been wrong a lot in history, and they're right that stimulus is a good idea. Many of the business leaders who signed that letter have also been saying that the level of the stimulus is risky, and so we need stimulus, but not all of this stimulus. I think that it's better to have stimulus than not to have stimulus, but I think there's enormous risk we are running that with all that we're doing, there's not going to be enough room for the public investments that are vitally important. And perhaps even more importantly, or as importantly, we're going to set ourselves up for inflation concerns. And then we're either going to have inflation or we're going to have a collision between fiscal and monetary policy to contain inflation of a kind that doesn't usually end well.
Listen to what he's saying. Listen. So this is when they were debating. I mean, there was no debate. I mean, Democrats were in charge. They were pushing it through no matter what. So there really wasn't any debate. But as they were getting ready to send this bill to Joe Biden and vote on it in the Senate, before this was even passed, before Joe Biden even put his name on it, this is what Larry Summers was saying. He was saying that what this is going to cause is inflation. And then after this causes inflation, then you're going to be coming up with crazy economic policies. This is essentially what he's saying. Larry Summers, Democrat, was predicting everything that you're seeing going on right now. He predicts that there's going to be inflation, but he predicts that the government's reaction to the inflation that they cause is going to be crazy economic policies like price gouging and giving people $25,000 for down payments. You know what? How about you don't raise the interest rate to combat the inflation and don't raise the prices of houses, and maybe I don't need your $25,000. Maybe I can afford the down payment and to get into a house by myself because of the problem that you caused in the housing market. Because inflation is not the only issue with the housing market. The interest rate is also an issue with the housing market. But why do we have such high interest rates? Is because the Fed had to raise interest rates to fight the inflation. So the reason that the housing prices are so high is because of you. And the reason that the groceries are so high is because of you. And Larry Summers is here saying that what's going to happen even before Joe Biden passed this $1.9 trillion without any Republicans voting for it, just forcing it through. He says it's going to cause inflation, and then then the government who caused inflation is going to start implementing crazy policies to combat the inflation that they caused.
Risk we are running that with all that we're doing, there's not going to be enough room for the public investments that are vitally important. And perhaps even more importantly, or as importantly, we're going to set ourselves up for inflation concerns. And then we're either going to have inflation or we're going to have a collision between fiscal and monetary policy to contain inflation of a kind that doesn't usually end well. It's not hard to see the internal contradictions. An economy with 3% GDP gap, getting 9% GDP fiscal stimulus is one way to see it. An economy with a net private savings rate that's 7-8%, dealing with an 18% of GDP budget deficit is another way to see it. Yes, there's fundamental public investments we need to make. Yes, there's a need for relief from COVID. And God knows we need to do things about inequality. But I think the scale of what we are doing, a nearly $2 trillion savings overhang, a 14% of GDP, $2.8 trillion of fiscal stimulus, the Fed with its foot on the accelerator to the floor and saying that it's going to stay that way for a very long time. That didn't happen without warning. I don't think it's amazing that we've seen more turbulence in financial markets. Some of that's got to do with the micromechanics of those financial markets, but some of it's got to do with the broader environment.
Well, so, I mean, he identifies the problem before because this guy understands economics. I mean, if anything, he understands what Niall Ferguson lays out in this documentary because these are basic economic principles. So, I mean, him being a Democrat, he's saying the same thing that Republicans were saying. It's not that we don't want to do stimulus. He's saying that we just don't want to do this much, that's too much. $2 trillion is too much. Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, full steam ahead. And you cannot leave out Kamala Harris. It's so funny. I was watching, I think it was CNN yesterday, and they were talking about Kamala Harris trying to separate herself from Joe Biden's policies. And that's something that she's going to try to do in the convention this week is they have Joe Biden speaking tonight, and then he's going to leave. He's not even staying for the rest of the convention. And then they want to, for the rest of the convention, focus on Kamala Harris as a new administration, that she doesn't really have anything to do with the policies of the Biden administration, that she's just the vice president. But Kamala Harris is taking full-on credit for her role for policies, for the policies. This doesn't get done. This $1.9 trillion does not get done without her 51st vote in the Senate. And she's not running from that. At least she wasn't last week in her speech where she laid out her economic policies. This is what she said.
So all of this is to say, 2 years ago as vice president, I was proud to cast the tie-breaking vote that sent the bill
that created all that inflation.
That gave Medicare the power to negotiate and let it get to the president's desk. And I was proud when our president, Joe Biden, signed that bill.
Proud. I was proud to sign it. I was proud to be the 51st vote. I am with him. It doesn't get done without him. I am proud that I created all of this inflation. I'm proud that I ran up prices on y'all, is what she's saying. And so again, in this CNN report, they were saying, well, how can you link Kamala Harris as vice president to Joe Biden's policies? That would be like linking Mike Pence to Trump's policies. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't at all. It wouldn't. This is what we talked about in previous podcasts, but Kamala Harris's tie-breaking votes. She not only was the tie-breaking vote on the bill that created all of the inflation, she was the tie-breaking vote on what Larry Summers says, the crazy policies that they end up doing, chasing their tail after creating the inflation. Well, one of those was the Inflation Reduction Act, was the creation of another $1 trillion, nearly $1 trillion, that she was the 51st vote on. So 33 33 votes, tie-breaking votes, Kamala Harris has made. Mike Pence, you come right down here to Mike Pence, 13. 13 tie-breaking votes that Mike Pence made. So Kamala Harris took 20 more tie-breaking votes than Mike Pence. Let's look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden, 0 tie-breaking votes. Dick Cheney before him, only 8. Al Gore before him, only 4. Dan Quayle, 0. George H.W. Bush, 7. You have to go to the next page before you start getting to any vice president that has taken nearly, no one has even touched the amount of tie-breaking votes that she has made to pass Joe Biden's agendas and get a lot of those nominations to confirm his justices and whatever else that they were confirming by the 51st vote, that she can't separate herself from his policies and his agenda because she passed it. And now she's bragging about it. There would be no policies without her. So after they created the inflation, the inflation bill, the American Rescue Bill that created the inflation. Look at the date, March 11th, 2021 is when Joe Biden signs this. So you're in March, and then the inflation starts kicking up around June. So March, April, May, June. So 4 months later from the time that Joe Biden signs this second $2 trillion bill in a 4-month period, 4 months later, then the inflation starts to increase as Larry Summers predicted. And this is what Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who was she was the chair of the Federal Reserve during the Obama administration, which is important. Going back to housing prices, why are housing prices so expensive? It's because of inflation. It is the lack of inventory too. And I actually like this plan of building, as long as it's done by the private sector and the government's not paying for this. Then I mean, green lighting more developments and creating more inventory. I'm all for this. I think this is a good plan. As a matter of fact, she's stealing all of Trump's proposal. I think Trump should steal this one. As long as it's done by the private sector and the contracts are fair, yes, I'm all for building and increasing the inventory. But we're going to get into this here in a little bit. But why are prices so high? Well, look right here. So you can look at this chart and you can see as prices start to go up on housing. So you see where you are right here. This is 2009, first quarter 2009. That's the lowest point of the dip after the crash. And what happens here in first quarter 2009 when Obama is sworn in that first quarter? Then you start seeing the Fed policy of quantitative easing. Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen, who is currently the Treasury Secretary, was the head of the Fed during this time. It may have been Bernanke, but she's coming in right after this, and she continues Bernanke's policy. But they start quantitative easing, lowering the interest rate to damn near zero, and you start seeing that right after the crash, it was like this short little dip, and then the pricing of real estate starts going up. Get over here so I can show you more of this. So it's going up. This is the price. And then you get here in 2020, and you can see this steep climb here in 2020. This is because of all this creation of new money that was taking place during COVID-19. You would think that housing prices would have gone down. Who's buying real estate during COVID? But there's this huge shoot up and this is because of the negative interest rates and the quantitative easing, and then the Fed starts raising interest rates, and then that's why you start seeing the real estate market level off here. But a lot of this and what increased the price of real estate has to do with the Fed policy under Janet Yellen as the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the quantitative easing, creating new money. And then she comes in, and when Joe Biden is sworn in as president, he makes her Treasury Secretary. So as Treasury Secretary, she comes right over from the Fed and starts continuing with Powell now at the Fed. And it's basically working together to cover up for the Fed's policy of creating all that money in Obama's first term. And there's a lot that I want to say about that, and I need to do an entire podcast on what happened in those first couple of years of the Obama administration. Who was Obama's chief economic advisor? This guy, Larry Summers, was Obama's chief economic advisor. He was the guy that was in the Bill Clinton administration. Larry Summers, in the Bill Clinton administration, who worked with Alan Greenspan and Timothy Geithner. Timothy Geithner came from the New York Fed, and he became Obama's Treasury Secretary. All these guys helped set up the crash. They helped set up the entire crash. So again, there's a lot that I want to say about that. I don't have much more time in this podcast, but I just want you to listen to what Janet Yellen was saying about the inflation after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris created the inflation by infusing our economy with all of this cash. This is what she said about the inflation.
Certainly want to make sure that inflation stays under control over the medium term. And we need to be very attentive to what's happening with inflation developments. We are watching them closely. My read of what's happening is that inflation is largely confined to sectors that are now opening back up. We're seeing big increases in airfares, hotels, and there is bottlenecks and supply chain problems that have particularly affected motor vehicles. So if you look, for example, at last month's inflation report, if you strip out motor vehicles. So listen,
so she's saying that the prices are high on motor vehicles. So let's just take motor vehicles out of the economic our economic analysis. Let's just remove motor vehicles, this particular sector that's bringing down our numbers. Let's just remove that sector, and then we have better looking numbers. This is what she's saying. Listen, it's hilarious. Because that's what they're doing right now.
Month's inflation report, if you strip out motor vehicles.
Strip it out.
Those sectors that were most affected by the pandemic and are now rapidly opening up, inflation ran at about 0.2%.
So it's at 0.2% if we strip out all of these sectors that have the real problems with inflation. We strip out the automobile sector and the airline sector, all these sectors that are really hurting our numbers. We strip those out, and then we have better numbers. We're down to 2%, is what she says. You got to take note of that, because I'm going to show you what they're doing right now.
Ran at about 0.2%.
0.2%. Sounds great, Janet.
Consistent longer run with 2% inflation.
So when do you think it'll settle down?
Well, I think we will have several more months of rapid inflation. So I'm not saying that this is a 1 month phenomenon, but I think over the medium term, we'll see inflation decline back toward normal levels. But of course, we have to keep a careful eye on it. Measures of inflation expectations, I think, still look quite well contained over the medium term. Those expectations are actually a driver of price-setting behavior. And so it is important that we monitor it carefully, but I believe fundamentally, that this is something that will settle down.
Transitory.
Transitory. So she said transitory a lot, and people started making fun of her. Now, she wasn't the only one saying transitory. You can look at the date on this. This is July 15th, 2021. So Joe Biden signs the $2 trillion bill with only Democrats in March. So now you're in July. And Janet Yellen, this is when you're already starting to see inflation rise. Like I said, it started happening around June, 4 months later. And Janet Yellen is saying that it is transitory. It's only going to be here for a few months, and then prices are going to go back down. Everybody was saying transitory. Take a listen.
We take inflation very seriously.
Economists call all these things transitory effects.
These one-time increases in prices are likely to have only transitory effects on inflation.
There will be transitory impacts as it relates to inflation.
I believe it's transitory.
Temporary or transitory impact.
In the end, it will be transitory.
These inflation rises will be transitory, that they will come back down next year. Inflation is going to come down next year. Inflation will come down next year.
Talk of inflation. The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down.
People fully expect this inflation to be temporary.
There's nobody suggesting there's unchecked inflation on the way. No serious economist.
The president's Build Back Better agenda as a whole will ease some of that inflationary pressure.
The bipartisan infrastructure deal and Build Back Better agenda could likely ease inflationary pressures.
It will ease longer-term inflationary pressure.
I mean, this clip is so damning. I think that Trump should make an ad out of this right here with all these fools saying that inflation was transitory. It was only going to be here a few months. Then it was going to go back down. These are all the experts. These are the experts. Janet Yellen, Jerome Powell. These are experts saying it's only going to be here for a few months and then it's going to go down. And then Janet Yellen had to admit that she got it wrong. Take a listen.
It wasn't just the president who got it wrong a year or so ago. I want to play for you what you said about inflation last year. Listen to this.
Is there a risk of inflation? I think there's a small risk, and I think it's manageable. I don't anticipate that inflation is going to be a problem, but it is something that we're watching very carefully.
Was it a mistake, Madam Secretary, to downplay this inflation risk? Did that contribute to the problems we're all seeing right now?
Well, look, I think I was wrong then.
Yeah, you were wrong. You were wrong. I think I was wrong then. You guys are wrong a lot. You guys are wrong a lot. What's the problem here? So going back to what she was saying here in this interview about how if we just, cut the automobile sector out of our numbers, we'll look good. We're down to 2%. Or the airline sector, we'll just cut them out because they're making our numbers look bad. So that's what they're doing with the inflation numbers, people. Came out last week that inflation is down to 3% for the first time, and everyone's celebrating. Oh, inflation is down to 3% for the first time. CPI report, inflation falls below 3% for the first time since 2021. But read the fine print, people. Read the fine print. What does that say? It says core inflation. Core inflation's down to 3%. July's core inflation, which excludes the volatile food and energy. Core inflation does not include food and energy. So all this time when they're telling you inflation is coming down, it doesn't include food or energy. And that's why she's doing this price gouging thing and calling it price gouging. It's not because the grocery stores are price gouging. The grocery stores are raising their rates on food and how much food costs because of inflation, because of how much money is in the system and how much it costs them to produce the food and bring it to the grocery store. That's why they're raising prices, not because they're gouging, because the food prices, if you include them in the inflation, then the inflation numbers are not coming down. It's the same thing with the energy. But because those are two volatile sectors, food and energy, then what they talk about is core inflation and core CPI, and this does not include. This is taking food and energy out, the two sectors that have the biggest inflation and which affect our lives more than anything. You got to eat every day. You got to use fuel and energy every day. Anyway, We'll get back into this in the next podcast. I have more that I want to break down about Kamala Harris's economic plans, and we'll see what happens at the convention this week, and there may be more to cover on Friday. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.